It began with a jar of peanut butter. Several years after the frying pan incident, a mother of two was ready to complete the next step towards her induction as a Looney Tunes character. With the opening of a refrigerator door, a jar of peanut butter precariously close to the edge of the shelf set loose from its chilly perch and landed squarely onto her left foot. Ouch. Also, broken. Boots and crutches and all. Naturally, in such conditions, now is the perfect time to take your kids on a 700-plus mile road trip back to Florida for a week-long vacation. It was summer, they both had friends they hadn't seen in a while, so did she. At least there was small mercy in it being the left foot. Driving wouldn't be that difficult. Unless, of course, they were the kind of family that insisted on driving stick shifts. Then it might be a little more difficult. But there was still one vital factor she had neglected to consider. The day they were set to arrive in Orlando was August 11th, 2013. The significance of said date? As if it needed to be explained. Why, it was the release of the ever-momentous, highly anticipated fourth entry in the acclaimed Mario Luigi series. And the smaller of the two, that precocious urchin, was definitely going to make a fuss about it. So, in her infinite generosity, there was to be a last-second addition to the itinerary, a local GameStop a few miles away from her host's house where they were planning to stay. It was a mistake. Emboldened by her acquiescence to such a selfish request, the unsympathetic ankle-biter would take the mile. It was going to be Mario and Luigi Dream Team the whole way. Why don't we go swimming in the pool we no longer had at home? Okay, but then it's right back to Mario and Luigi Dream Team. Let's all go to Epcot. We don't have that anymore either. Fine, but only for a short while. There was Mario and Luigi Dream Team to be playing. Go hang out with your brother's friends. Yeah, but only as long as I get to bring Mario and Luigi Dream Team. It had become an all-consuming world. The early bird chirped to the worm of Mario and Luigi Dream Team. The night owl burned midnight oil from the drum of Mario and Luigi Dream Team. The hills were alive with the sound of Mario and Luigi Dream Team. Why the mother allowed this sorry display to continue will forever remain a mystery. It is unclear if she was even cognizant of the depths of her son's depravity. In no time at all, a week had passed. The trip was up. All the oblivious Moppet had accomplished was encapsulated within that wretched portable device. It didn't seem to bother him. During the final night, the long drive home, the rapacious cherub would come face to face with an experience befitting his behavior. On his first and last visit to a Cracker Barrel, he would order what appeared to be a regular hamburger. There, that evening in the motel room, he would find his vacation coming out of both ends. Tutorials. You know 'em, you love 'em, and boy does Mario and Luigi Dream Team sure have a lot of them. If anything, Dream Team's relationship to tutorials is its most culturally defining feature, the one thing basically anyone who's played it has an opinion on. Dream Team's tutorials are bad, so goes conventional wisdom. But it's always good to question assumptions, especially ones that have become long ingrained and accepted as truth. Are Dream Team's tutorials really as encumbering as we've been led to believe? It's little surprise people took notice of the game's tutorialization. More so than prior Mario and Luigi's, Dream Team was designed to assume unfamiliarity with RPGs and action games. In the Iwata Asks interview on Dream Team, the developers noticed that many of their female staff struggled with the difficulty of the game, something they attributed to a lack of experience with the genre. Using their own Tomomi Sano as a barometer for the game's comprehensibility, Dream Team was set to capture novice gamers by adding additional support features, counteracting a growing issue, as producer Akira Otani believed that until now, there hadn't been enough explanation about how to play RPGs. It's not a stretch to suggest that providing extra clarity on genre conventions through more explicit tutorialization would have followed from such a viewpoint. You don't have to take the developer's words for it. There's a sledgehammer approach that's plain to see the moment the game begins. I bet you know, but to move, use the circle pad, and to jump, press the A button. Also, see that icon in the upper right of the screen? Normally, it shows the jump icon for pressing the A button, right? But hold up. When you approach characters or signs, that icon will change. Like that, check out your A button now. Pressing the button when it looks like that will make you chat with folks or read signs. Try it out as you wander around. Wow. For the record, that was 8 whole text boxes with diagrams attempting to explain how to talk to NPCs. Something the average game could easily communicate in one sentence, if they felt the need to at all. A long-winded diatribe which had the audacity to begin with, "I bet you know." Apparently not. Things quickly go downhill from there. This next tutorial happens not but a minute later. I want to highlight the Pillow Island service we like to call saving. This complimentary service preserves the fond memories of your stay. As this is your first stay on Pillow Island, allow me to explain how to save. Please take a look at the touchscreen. See the giant S icon that says save? Yup, there. If you touch that icon, you'll save your current data. Also, if you hit a block like that, that'll also save your data. Traveling can be unpredictable, but if you save your data often, you needn't worry about a thing. Don't forget to save often. Look, this is some obscene stuff right here. Who would have thought the button with the word save on it saves your game? While these two are by far some of the most egregious examples in the game, they begin to hit at what the actual problem with Dream Team's tutorials are. There's nothing wrong with teaching the player about interacting with NPCs or saving, but Dream Team takes it upon itself to do so in the most intrusive, belabored way imaginable. These tutorials aren't written for novice gamers, they're written for people who've just learned about the very concept of a video game. This is gaming from first principles, and everyone else is forced to go along with the ride. Dream Team consistently underestimates the ability of its own design to teach the player its rules. Once you get to the Pillow Castle Underground, Smoldergeist stops you to warn of ruthless challenges and horrific aerial trials. In reality, it's a tutorial on jumping with the bros individually while moving the circle pad. Once you've made it up a whole 3 steps, Smoldergeist stops you again to warn about another trial. This time a tutorial on jumping with the bros simultaneously while moving the circle pad. Putting a pin in the absurd granularity to which the game is breaking down its basic movement system, these interruptions are frustrating because they're clearly redundant. The Pillow Blimp port, right after that terrible saving tutorial, has you go through several screens with blocks scattered across scaffolding. In order to reach these blocks, you have to perform the very same jump plus circle pad actions Smoldergeist wanted to teach us. Ah, but in Pillow Castle Underground, we have to jump with 2 bros, not just 1. Okay, but remember what happens immediately before this. A minigame in which you're forced to alternate jumps between bros, and then another minigame along a moving platform in which you were taught different timings for when to jump each bro, including simultaneous jumps. This means that by the time we've reached Smoldergeist, we've already learned how to navigate jumping while moving and how to navigate jumping with 2 bros. All that's left is to put 2 and 2 together. But the game seems to think us incapable of doing this, a strange thing for sure, considering at least 2 of the instances I just mentioned managed to teach us things without forcing text boxes through our eyes the whole time. They did what any clever game would do, allow the design of the scenario itself to funnel the player into the desired action, in a low-stakes situation where there is no punishment for failure but reward for success. Okay, I'm picking up that pin now. The absurd granularity one, you remember. One of the big draws for Dream Team is the Dream World, a 2D plane building off of the same gameplay style from Bowser's Inside Story. The key component of the Dream Worlds, other than its 2D perspective, are the Luiginary works, manipulations done to Luigi in the real world that affect his dream state. But as we've already seen, Dream Team loathes the idea of teaching more than one thing to the player at a time. So the first Dreamy Pillow Castle segment left it at standard 2D exploration without any mention of these gimmicks so as to not overwhelm. What this forces the game to do moments later is, just when it looks like the adventure is getting started, contrive a second trip down to the Pillow Castle underground, via a broken bridge, my beloved, to get us back into the dream world and teach us about Luiginary works proper. And, as an added bonus, catch us up on the core premise of the game, what with freeing the pillows, Antasma, and a more formal introduction to Dreambert. What occurs as a result of this broken bridge here is actually quite necessary to the game as a whole, but one could easily imagine how a more swift game might have folded all of the Dream World basics plus the premise into our initial sojourn through Pillow Castle, rather than invent a thinly veiled stopgap right when it seemed Tutorial Land was over. Dream Team's utter terror at the idea of losing the player is, ironically enough, a major contributor to the dreary pace people often associate with them drifting away from the game. Consider what goes on in Bowser's Inside Story. Combing over the intro as I've done with Dream Team, we'll see identical tricks being employed. A courtyard in Peach's castle to get you to practice jumping. Sections within the trash pit to get you used to movement in 2D. Then movement with both bros, and even the exact same timed button press challenge alternating the two. Then the trash pit gets efficient. You also get your hammer and bros attack tutorials out of the way here too. Lastly, there's a final segment in Cavi Cape where you get introduced to Bowser combat, and that's the bulk of tutorialization done. This entire sequence takes a little under an hour. Despite being very similar games, Dream Team will somehow take 3 times that amount to reach the same mechanical point. The silver lining here is that Dream Team does give you the option to say no to many of its overbearing tutorials, unlike the saving one, and it does ultimately respect that choice, even if it's also insistent on letting you know that you should absolutely not, under no circumstances, say no. Fortunately, after Mushrise Park, the game tones down the smothering and begins to leave you alone for good stretches of time. A majority of the tutorials at this point are either to explain new overworld abilities and new Luiginary works. The former are inoffensive, rare, and routine for the Mario Luigi series, but I still have a bone to pick with the latter. Because every dream world has a new work, every new dream world will also have you accosted so the game can make sure you're on track. Once again, the game is underselling its design. The different works share a consistent and legible design language, and so the skills necessary to learn the first few works should easily transfer into using the others. Nearly all of the works function by spinning Luigi's nose, pulling on his mustache, or tapping a button. And if it's not immediately clear which is when, helpful sparkles appear on the part of the bottom screen that's interactable at that moment. There's no mystery. Furthermore, the work that doesn't require touchscreen interactions, the Luiginoid formations, mirrors the overworld movements in terms of scrolling through and accessing abilities. The cone formation is even a direct analog of the spin jump learned in the same area. Yet despite this, the game is deeply distrustful of the player. It doesn't believe we can interpret its labyrinthine syntax of symbols and platforms. So it will explain it to us, again and again and again. Interesting. Hitting that block cued an elevator. Incredible. The more you think about this clip, the worse it gets. My claim in criticizing Dream Team's tutorials is not to suggest that text tutorials are worthless, and that tutorials should always be left up to the level design or it's an automatic failure. Even within Dream Team, there are certainly legitimate instances in which an explanation for an unintuitive mechanic is warranted. The Luiginary ball forms have nuanced movement patterns, like being able to shift the ball hammer up or down while swinging, that's not obvious at first glance. That I can bounce off walls while anti-gravity is active does not strike me as something I would have thought of doing had the game not explicitly told me. I simply argue that the game is not discerning enough in where it chooses to place these speeches, and when one does come along, it is often 10 times more distracting than it needs to be. I seriously doubt anyone needs a 2-minute explanation on what happens when the temperature turns hot versus when it turns cold. The results are self-evident, I should think. What's vexing, a word this game taught me, thank you very much, is that we get some glimpses of what a more trusting Dream Team looks like. Giant battles are a huge departure from the rest of the game. You'd think this would get Dream Team whipped up into a frenzy, but it remains surprisingly collected during these moments. Nearly every tutorial can be denied. The process only takes 1 or 2 text boxes, and then it's off to the races. Minimal interference. There's a startling moment in dreamy Driftwood Shore. Upon entering one of the Seedring's dream worlds, we stumble onto that area's new work, Luiginary Gravity. But nothing happens. The camera doesn't pan over, the UI doesn't disappear, Dreambird doesn't pop in, Going with the Bros doesn't start playing. It's as if we've stumbled onto nothing at all. What's even more shocking is that upon entering the work, the touchscreen reveals a brand new interaction wholly unique to Luiginary Gravity, spinning the inflatable Luigi's sleeping on in 90-degree intervals to influence the direction of gravity's pull. Luckily, helpful arrows on the inflatable make it clear what should be done, and coins in the room make clear which direction gravity should be oriented for success. What is going on here? We were just allowed to learn a new mechanic on our own, and the game didn't crash, the universe didn't contract into an explosive singularity, and to my knowledge, there was never a flood of children descending upon Nintendo HQ because they couldn't figure out what to do. The game simply spoke for itself and everything worked out fine. And it was a brand new, never-before-seen mechanic. See, Dream Team, it is possible. At least, it's possible until it isn't. Having learned nothing from dreamy Driftwood Shore, the game relapses and continues to harass you about every new work in the next few areas. I suspect the momentary tutorial blip in Driftwood Shore is a consequence of that area's progression. Though I've never done this myself, and have not seen anyone else do it either, you may be able to progress through the main dream world of Driftwood Shore one dream egg at a time. It's unintuitive, as it means backtracking between Cedric's dream world and his siblings multiple times, but since you can do the siblings in any order, it means Luiginary Gravity is the only work in which there are 2 possible locations where you could first encounter it. One in the first expansion of Dreamy Driftwood Shore, or the other in C-Toon's dream. That would explain why the initial room in both locations look nearly the same, to provide the same introduction. So the lack of a tutorial may be a result of the game not wanting to explicitly tutorialize the same work on 2 different occasions. Frankly, I'm surprised Dream Team was willing to show this much restraint. It didn't give us the same courtesy when explaining how badges worked the second time. I think my survey is complete. What's the verdict on Dream Team's tutorials? Well, they're not winning any awards, that's for sure. What I think the dreamy Driftwood Shore situation reveals is that a majority of this game's teaching moments are simply and obviously excessive. There is little reason to assume that a player can figure out one new mechanic by themselves, but not literally any other. However, setting aside the sluggish first 3 hours, where the whole structure of the game bends and sways and broken bridges itself to the whims of the tutorials, it's difficult to let these brief nuisances define the character of the overall experience. That's because once the game's done yapping, we get to see Dream Team put the material it's been teaching to the test. And that, I assure you, is the more interesting thing by far. As I praised in my Bowser's Inside Story video, the most endearing part of that game was how clearly in love it was with the DS hardware. Bowser's Inside Story saw styluses and microphones in a book orientation and said, well, we've gotta do that. It was a gimmicky game that thought just enough about how it should contextualize those gimmicks to form something cohesive. A similar thing can be said of Dream Team with respect to the 3DS. What it changes from its predecessor are responses to the demands of the new console. The screen economy of the DS was more egalitarian, with a bias towards the bottom half thanks to its touchscreen functionality. Touching is good and all that. This is why most DS games emphasized placing the action on the bottom half of the console, relegating maps and stats and such to the top half. While slightly more adventurous games, Bowser's Inside Story included, sought to make use of both screens and made efforts to transition between the two halves seamlessly. Rarely, though, did a DS game emphasize only the top screen as the primary focal point of action. Things flipped with the 3DS. There was now heavy emphasis on keeping the action solely contained to the top screen, thanks to its bigger size and of course the stereoscopic 3D that gave the console its namesake. Gone were the days of primarily touch-controlled games, and few games tried to split the action across screens at all. With the 3DS, the novelty of touching had worn off. The touchscreen became the de facto menu zone. There is an argument to be made that this change makes the 3DS a less ambitious and compelling console than the DS. I think there's some truth to that. We see it in Dream Team. While Bowser's Inside Story split its two worlds across screens, overworld up top, inside Bowser on the bottom, the real and dream worlds in Dream Team both display on the top screen. Not only does this dilute the clear division between the two worlds Bowser's Inside Story was intentional in setting up, the more noticeable thing is that Dream Team's 2D environments still maintain a connection to the touchscreen despite the change. This makes touch interactions less seamless, because the flow of attention is constantly being interrupted between screens every time there's a touch action. This differs from Bowser's Inside Story, where that game was careful about already funneling your attention to the touchscreen before any touch action was required. With the sole exception of the chess station, you were never asked to use the touchscreen while the action was happening on the top screen, is what I'm saying. On the other hand, it's worth pointing out that what I've just outlined is not a bad thing. Because the primary action almost never takes place on the touchscreen, 3DS games have a more translational quality to them. That is, you have to translate what your movement on the bottom half of the console was going to do on the top half, rather than the action being directly represented as it was on a majority of DS games. But that translational aspect makes a lot of sense for a game like Dream Team, doesn't it? The whole conceit of the game is that you're supposed to be indirectly interfering with the dream worlds through Starlow. You're not literally making Dreamy Mount Pajamaja warm, you're making Luigi warmer, which makes him imagine a warmer version of Mount Pajamaja. So on that level, the fact that you control Starlow, who controls Luigi's mustache, which then corresponds to the mustache tree's movements, is a whole lot more consistent with the game's understanding of dream worlds than if the dream world had appeared on the bottom screen and we controlled the mustache tree's movements ourselves. So perhaps I argue making the touch controls a little more awkward than Bowser's Inside Story is an inspired choice on Dream Team's part. Indeed, I think Dream Team demonstrates that the 3DS's hardware wasn't necessarily less ambitious, but perhaps that the console's library was overall less keen on making use of its features. One such feature is the dreaded gyro control, something which Dream Team is obsessed with. From bros attacks to Luiginary attacks to giant battle attacks, I cannot think of another game that requires you to participate in the gyro festivities quite as much as Dream Team. It is for this reason, maybe even more than Bowser's Inside Story, that it is infinitely preferable to play on original hardware. Despite assertions to the contrary, it works pretty well, especially on the new 3DS models, whereas I can now speak from experience and say that it definitely does not work so well on an emulator. And that's really the same crux I identified in Bowser's Inside Story too, isn't it? Foregoing visual preferences, the console is probably being utilized well if the tactile feel of the game is at its greatest when on that hardware, instead of using, say, a substitute controller. Not foregoing visual preferences, the other reason to play it on original hardware is, of course, because of the absolutely beautiful 3D effect. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times, and I haven't said it at all. Dream Team has the best stereoscopic 3D of any 3DS game released. It's seriously that good. The way Dream Team is able to use the 3D most effectively is how it's implemented through combat. Through bros attacks and gyro controls, yes, and strong optional enemies that will occasionally intrude into a fight from the background, and also deliberate attack patterns that use depth to their advantage, as well as chase sequence moves that periodically happen during boss battles. Dodging attacks has never been as elaborate before as it is in Dream Team. But the most significant implementation is Dream Team's new combat system within the Dream World. I think I previously said Paper Jam had the best battling of the Mario and Luigi series. I'm retracting that now because Dreamy combat is significantly more transformative than I remembered it being. Given that there's only one character to attack with, imbued with the strength of imaginary Luigis, the Dream battles read as Dream Team's iteration of Bowser combat from Bowser's Inside Story, but this second go-around is much more substantive than the first. Bowser combat, in truth, was not all that different from Bros combat in that game. Enemies organized themselves in identical ways, and attacking or defending with a punch, a flame, and a shell instead of a jump and hammer was closer to an aesthetic change than something that produced meaningfully different calculations in how to approach the encounter. The vacuum block, the last new tool in Bowser's arsenal, was literally a mechanism to transform Bowser combat back into traditional Mario and Luigi combat. The most unique aspect of Bowser's fights ended up being his Bros attack equivalent, but I can't say I preferred stylus attacks more than the usual button prompts on the aggregate. There are two factors that make Dream combat more interesting. The first is enemy organization. Consistent with how the game plays Dreamy Luigi, most enemies in the Dream world organize themselves in hordes. Which action to be performed was not only a function of the usual considerations, say whether the enemy is flying or has spikes on its head, but also their configuration at the moment. If the enemies are spread apart, that usually indicates you should jump, as a horde of Luigis will spread the damage out from the initial target. Since the hammer attack flows in a wave, with the strongest damage being done at the beginning of the wave's movement, this move is best utilized when enemies are bunched together and don't vary across a large horizontal distance. These are meaningfully different calculations than what a Mario and Luigi game has asked of us before. The second factor that adds spice to Dreamy combat are the dodging mechanics. They've literally added another dimension to it. Counteracting most enemies requires you not only worry about when to jump or hammer, but also either in which cardinal direction or along what specific point across a vertical plane. These increased variables lead to some of the most creative, engrossing, and frankly difficult enemy patterns in the series. We see how positionality matters with enemies like the Spritz Bloom, where bouncing back a bubble at just the right angle causes the resulting poison explosion to hit the target and its surroundings. One of my favorite examples has to be the Mecha Koopas though. This enemy has a gimmick wherein jumping on one will initiate a malfunction, causing the Mecha Koopa to do the opposite of the standard Mecha Koopa attack. So, if a regular Mecha Koopa jumping means you must jump over it, the malfunctioning Mecha Koopa jumping means you must stand still. Their other attack causes them to split into 4 different groups and charge at Mario from different directions. If you have a mix of regular and malfunctioning Mecha Koopas in play, this can lead to chaos where you have to remember the order the groups charge at you in, the different timings it takes the Mecha Koopas to reach you, and the fact that the malfunctioning Mecha Koopas will hit Mario from the opposite side they begin charging at. I could go on about attack patterns all day, but I think these two examples illustrate just how many possibilities open up now that Dream Team is taking advantage of a 3D space. Luiginary attacks benefit from these combat changes as well. While some still follow the classic mode of only being timed button presses, more are designed around positionality and combating hordes. Luiginary Wall has you knock a spinning Luigi back and forth while moving Mario across a horizontal plane, keeping in mind to not let the main Luigi escape the Luigi bounds. Luiginary Stack tasks you with uniformly aligning each new section of the Luigi stack as it grows. Meanwhile, Z-Egg is all about lining up the glowing Wake Orb with the Z-Keeper across a horizontal plane, the only Bros attack to follow a similar design pattern to the Luiginary ones. We can even see how the game's 3-dimensional thinking manifests itself in the giant battles. Instead of Bowser's fist and flame, Luigi works with a jump and hammer, but that hammer is further subdivided into 2 kinds of swings, one which pushes the enemy backwards and one which pushes them into the background. This adds a smidgen of extra strategy to the encounters and incentivizes further thinking of the battle's environmental context. It's solid additions like these that make Mario and Luigi's transition to 3D a worthwhile effort. Dream Team specifically feels like a sequel to Bowser's Inside Story in a way no other Mario and Luigi game does with its predecessor. A lot of Dream Team's design elements are clearly and obviously carryovers from that game. I highly doubt, for example, that the Dream Worlds being in 2D was commentary on the idealized form of a Mario game, but instead, well, that's what we did the last time we created 2 separate states of play. Despite this, I think it would be a mistake to castigate Dream Team as being something derivative or thoughtless. What we've seen so far, the Luiginary works in the Dream World, the reconstituting of Bowser combat into Dream combat, and the improvements to giant battles, shows us something else. It shows us that Bowser's Inside Story left a lot of good stuff on the table. Let's go back to the Luiginary works. Bowser's Inside Story had a version of these too. You might not remember them very well because they were understated and honestly a little boring. Bowser's Inside Story had 3 works: drinking water at the fountain to cause the pump works to flood, standing in the X-ray machine to reveal hidden blocks in the energy hold, and breathing in cold air to freeze the airway. And the reason why there were only 3 works was because the game only had a total of 5 large 2D zones, one of which was the starting tutorial area, and the other of which was done while Bowser was immobilized, preventing any crossover actions. Contrary to the title, there was not as much inside Bowser in Bowser's Inside Story as one might have assumed. Dream Team is much different. The 2D segments maintain a much stronger presence throughout, with each of the 8 areas getting at least 1 major dream area, plus literally dozens of smaller dream stages, both optional and mandatory, that permeate the designated real-world portion of that area. And to maintain interest, the game relies on a greater variety of mechanics with a greater variety of effects. Hence, the Luiginary works. Notice how the works in Bowser's Inside Story were mostly static. The X-ray didn't change what you were doing or how you were doing it, and the icy breath had limited to no effects on a majority of the terrain in the airway. An ice level without ice physics challenges? These works, in practice, amounted to a filter on your screen. The fountain, on the other hand, produced a dynamic effect. It turned the pump works from a regular platforming stage into a water level. This was more exciting because it changed how you moved and thought about the entire breadth of the area. Dream Team, on top of having triple the amount of works, trends towards the dynamic interactions over the static ones. The fountain work is replicated with anti-gravity. The tree stash has you angle and direct the equivalent of a catapult to launch Mario onto faraway platforms. Speedometer alters the height and distance of Mario's jumps by altering the flow of time. The propeller blows a wind that can cause Mario to stick to and climb any wall in the same direction of the wind. Even the few works which are static in nature justify themselves better with their execution. The sneeze wind gets used to shift platforms between the foreground and background, requiring you to think about where Mario will be standing after the resulting shift. At its midpoint, Dream Team ends up doing a better airway than the airway by reusing the hot-cold gimmick for slightly improved ice puzzles. And actually including ice physics for platforming challenges in the area proper. When you get down to it, Dream Team's Luiginary works behave like a spiritual precursor to Super Mario Wonder's wonder effects, augmenting each level in wacky and unpredictable ways. Dare I say they're also better utilized? Dream Team's additional complexity pays dividends. One of the less exciting things about Bowser's Inside Story was Bowser's overworld moveset. In contrast to the Bros, Bowser didn't get many interesting overworld abilities to play with until about the second Star Cure. To accommodate his limited moveset, most of the overworld design became flat corridors without much in the way of platforming challenges. That problem has vanished in Dream Team. The Bros are just as versatile in the overworld as they have been in any other Mario and Luigi, and thanks to the plethora of works in the Dream World, there's no half of Dream Team that feels less mechanically demanding to play than the other. The whole game is a more holistically engaging experience. Dream Team addresses another one of my big critiques of Bowser's Inside Story: a big combat arsenal and nearly no time to use them. The back half of that game threw so many Bros attacks at you, some of which were outclassed so immediately you wondered why they were even included in the first place. Dream Team addresses this in 2 ways. Firstly, Mario and Luigi are each given a different set of Bros attacks rather than having access to a complete list. This means, other than the shell, you can't use the same Bros attack 2 times in a row, forcing you to expand your move pool by at least 1 additional move. Secondly, Dream Team introduces expert challenges to encourage further mastery of combat. While the Bros moves challenges can hardly be called as such, they only require you to get a single excellent to complete. The dodge challenges will likely have you barreling towards more enemies than you otherwise would have if experience was the only concern. At least, that's the behavior I observed in myself. And there's no better method to get you using more Bros attacks than getting you into more battles in the first place. Okay, I sort of lied. There's a third way Dream Team better gets you acquainted with its Bros attacks. A simple matter of mathematics. There are the same number of attacks as in Bowser's Inside Story, but a lot more space between them. That's because Dream Team, before Brothership rolled around that is, was the longest Mario and Luigi. Even though it's second now, this is still a chunky game by Mario RPG standards. Like with the overstuffed tutorials, this was no accident. The developers stating both their intent to increase the volume of the game as compared to Bowser's Inside Story, and citing the transition to 3D as a motivating factor for larger and more ambitious levels. The result is a game that is at least 10 hours longer than Bowser's Inside Story. What I hope to have shown here, though, is that Dream Team has earned its additional runtime. There is a variety and thoughtfulness of approach to every aspect of the game that maintains the momentum even through a lengthy 3-hour area. Obvious examples of RPG padding, infamously the Ultabed quest, are still buoyed by introducing new mechanics in the overworld and dream worlds, new applications of old mechanics, new enemy types, and new sub-areas within previously explored regions. The game still feels like it's developing at this moment. It's a helpful contrast to the few times where Dream Team doesn't get it right, say, like the first half of Neo Bowser Castle. You have to chase down Kamek on 3 separate occasions, but this becomes easier over time for some reason. The room layouts become smaller and less complex each successive chase, which is even true of the dream worlds, and Kamek scrambles the passageways less and less. I didn't get to twist the doors as much as I would have liked, but no matter, it's still complex enough to trap your small brains. The only twisting done in this portion is quite literally the exit. The rest of the castle remains unchanged. It's an odd sequence, made into a slog partially because it's the same task 3 times in a row, but mostly because the task degrades instead of develops. It's the exception that proves the rule. By and large, Dream Team is pretty good at iterating on its ideas, and it helps that the things Dream Team is doing at base are strong enough to want to revisit. Maybe that's why I've played such an obscene amount of this game over the course of my life. Pillow Island is one of my favorite settings from a Mario game. It has many of the familiar and somewhat tired biomes we've come to expect from the series, but there's a cohesive wrapping around the game that elevates what otherwise might be rote material. Pillow Island is a budding tourist destination built alongside the ruins of a long-lost ancient culture, and each area in the game is shown to exist in relation to this growing commercial enterprise. There's a heavy emphasis on construction and development. Pillow Castle is a newly refurbished hotel and museum hybrid, hosting precious pillow artifacts on the lower floors. Mushrise Park focuses on Brickle's efforts to transform the barren, muddy fields of the park into something more scenic. Dozing Sands sees Britta running a drill site to make the desert a region safe for tourists. Mount Pajamaja gets its appeal as a place for daredevil rock climbers to test their mettle. Driftwood Shore is the expected tropical resort. Wakeport is the furnished tourist trap town, filled with shops, tour guides, and tacky merchandise. Meanwhile, Somnom Woods defines itself in contrast, a dense forest and the only region of the island untouched by tourism, featuring the largest amount of standing pillow architecture. Those last 2 areas listed are the clear highlights for Dream Team, both being the game's most original ideas, but also thanks to their immaculate execution. It cannot be emphasized enough how strong Dream Team's presentation is, sprite work, environments, music, and all. Top 3 Yoko Shimomura soundtrack? Years after the fact, I had forgotten how much I liked the dreamy battling, but the sights and sounds of Pillow Island were never lost to me. Wakeport is an absolutely bustling little town for a handheld RPG, NPCs scattered across its paved streets. I spent nearly an hour of this most recent playthrough just spilling out of every window of every building, chatting up the locals and reading bookshelves. Of course, we can't leave out Somnom Woods, for what I might call the best penultimate area in any video game. It has this transformative aspect to it, beginning in a dark canopy of forest flooded with electrified poison. But as you climb higher, deeper, the forest brightens, revealing an expanse of turquoise grass and violet flowers jutting above the canopy between the ruined pillars. This is the spiritual birthplace of the pillow's connection to the dream world. Mount Pajamaja has a similar transformation as you climb towards its summit, but as the fire-ice motif is so familiar, Somnom Woods certainly takes the edge. There's something so imposing about this zone. It's as the famous saying goes, there are two kinds of people in this world. Those that like Mario and Luigi Dream Team, and those that haven't listened to Dreamy Somnom Labyrinth enough times. Congruent with Pillow Island being in a state of construction, the game tasks us with restoring the Pillow's presence on the island by finding their petrified bodies and awakening them. Not to turn this into another Paper Jam rant, but this is how you design a game-wide collectible. Notice how the Pillows and Paper Toads are one and the same quest. Each area has a specific number of people in need of rescue, and each teleports you to what is essentially a pocket dimension to do so. But the Pillows are actually present and locatable in the world themselves, are an active element contextualized within the story and setting, and the tasks the pocket dimensions ask you to do are rooted in the game's core mechanics. The Paper Toads, on the other hand, seemed to selectively exist only in the random intervals when the game decided it was time to save more of them, and even then they were almost unilaterally confined to abstract checklists found in one copy-paste building across the world. The tasks required to rescue them seemed to have less to do with the game we were actively playing, and more to do with which Mario Party minigames were most fascinating to the developers at the time. Sorry, I still don't think people understand how dreadful Paper Jam is. The answer key on how to do this kind of thing was literally in the last game. Pillow Island as a popular tourist hub also offers Dream Team an easy excuse to bring back multiple other species and characters from prior games, Popple, Kylie, and Broke Monsieur being the most distinguished examples. Starlo also reappears, but she's being utilized more specifically here than just as reference material. It may seem like Starlo doesn't fit in a game like Dream Team at all, given that her sassiness was specifically crafted to play off of Bowser's surly attitude. While that is certainly true, I find that she still works as a counterpart to Dream Team's new companion, Dreambert. The Speaks Her Mind Star Sprite against the overly stoic, proper Prince is a dynamic that hits the same kind of tension that ultimately made Starlo and Bowser effective. It's a dynamic that the game plays sparingly, which is too bad because it's wonderful in the few instances where it happens. Dream Team is the only Mario and Luigi game that comes close to capturing ensemble dynamics between main characters. The bros, Starlo, and Dreambert have solid chemistry with each other when it's expressed. Nevertheless, all these returning characters and peoples lend Dream Team a sort of celebratory air, a sense in which the game is positioning itself as the culmination of all that Mario and Luigi was and has become. Certainly, the sheer volume of content can attest to that. No better is that vibe articulated than with Bowser. Dream Team manages to wrap a cute little bow on the character. Bowser is presented as a bit of a doofus across the series. He's always being outwitted, undermined, scammed, or possessed. Poor Bowser can't even have his own castle in the Mario and Luigi games. So when Phantasma and Bowser team up in Dreams Deep, the series has trained us how to read this event. Clearly, this will end with inevitable betrayal. Bowser has no idea what trouble he's signed up for. But the bigger fool is us, for Dream Team is deliberately playing off this expectation to reverse the roles. Phantasma is in fact the minion in Bowser's scheme, not the other way around. Thus, for the first time in the series, the actual no-really Bowser stands as our primary villain. The first 4 games in the Mario and Luigi series could almost stand as a Bowser origin story, explaining how this 2-bit nuisance became the classic villain hounding Mario in the platformers. And though it is too much of a stretch to say he went through some kind of elongated character arc, that's placing way too much intention onto a character that was relegated to the sidelines for 3 of the games, Dream Team's choices close a certain loop nonetheless. It's a fun twist that would work even better if only Phantasma weren't such a snore of a villain himself. He does nothing and has next to zero presence throughout the story. I like him in the sense that he occupies an important position within the story, both in terms of suggesting a point of failure for why the Pillow Kingdom fell, as well as facilitating the aforementioned Bowser twist, but it would be nice if I were able to praise the character in specific, instead of leaving it at the general constructs he represents. Dream Team needs a whole lot less of Phantasma than some people may think, but it definitely needs a whole lot more of him than it's currently giving. Wakeport has this interesting little subplot. In order to begin our tour up Mount Pajamaja, we must rouse Big Massive from his potentially eternal slumber. Within the dream world, we discover that he doesn't want to wake up because, in dream world, I battle challengers of true beef is best way to pump up muscles and mind. Real world is weak. Big massive stay here. He believes that there is no strength left to reach for in the real world, so he must instead surrender himself to his imagination to get what he wants. I like this subplot because it's a rare instance of Dream Team attempting to connect to the metaphorical concept of a dream, to get to grips with what one is and why we have them. The game doesn't do this often because other than Bowser and Luigi, Big Massive is the only other character whose dreams we enter and explore ourselves. The game never gets an opportunity to comment on anyone else's dreams or how they desire them. That's too bad, because it's clear Dream Team finds something sinister in Big Massive, that the outlook provided by his dream is destructive and self-defeating. We must prove, as Dreambert suggests, that there are real challenges still awaiting him in the real world. He only need look for them. It's a sentiment consistent with the Z-Keeper's advice at the end of the game. Don't rely on the Dreamstone. Don't rely on things. Seriously. Rely on yourselves, on each other. Throw away material crutches, and you guys will be better for it. Dream Team implies that the Pillow Kingdom's destruction was brought about by an over-reliance on objects like the Dream and Nightmare Stones, objects said to grant wishes. And what is a wish stone if not a dream? With a few simple thoughts, a simple desire for something to be true, they can conjure up a whole reality to match. But Pillow Island shows us what the world is really like. The ruins, the broken fountains, the pounding drills, we all exist in a world under construction. We can choose to consume ourselves completely within the dream, like Big Massive, or we can work together to build the space around us into something spectacular. That is why Dream Team insists hordes and imagination are connected. A dream only comes true when many minds combine to realize it. Dreamy Luigi is not one being, but a mass of smaller, tinier Luigis mustering forces to make a greater whole. In Dreams Deep, we see Luigi's inner thoughts flash across the screen. He desires to be the kind of person who is kind and capable, a person who can be relied and depended upon, a person of confidence. But that's not the kind of confidence that can be built in a day, nor without the right bro.